welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm Sarah Condon, your host. In just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-host, RJ Heyman and David Zoll. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Happy Halloween to the two of you. I've seen pictures of what transpired in Houston this past week, but how did it go for you with your little ones?
Oh, it was awesome. We did Halloween twice because we live in a really intense neighborhood that has a lot of people that I think have a lot of time on their hands. I mean, I love them, but they seem to have a lot of time on their hands because they were worried our children wouldn't be able to do Halloween on Halloween because of the weather. So we did a mini Halloween the day before, and then we still did Halloween on Halloween. And because I don't want my children to be traumatized by their childhoods more than I can already help, when people started showing up to get candy on Halloween, I was like, we have to do this again. So yeah, we are done with Halloween.
What about you, RJ? You guys have done some incredible family shots in the past. Did you get one this year?
We did not. This was, without question, our worst Halloween ever.
Oh, no.
I know, it was bad. I mean, number one, because there was a legit monsoon that came through Houston on Halloween, such that, like, my wife wasn't even really sure she could make it home from school. Like, she had to take back roads because people's cars were getting flooded, like that type of thing. Sort of like, not exactly, nothing like Harvey, but, you know, it was bad. And then it took me an hour to get home. And then when we got home, our two teenage boys had like so much homework to do that they're like, yeah, we were supposed to go to a friend's house for a party. And they were like, we don't think we can go. And then, so we basically just stayed home and handed out candy. Although Marshall had a good time. He really, our 2-year-old enjoyed opening the door and going, Happy Halloween. And then, you know, putting candy into people's baskets. So I think he had a good Halloween. The rest of us, not so much. We do have a family picture because we did an 80s themed joint birthday party with a friend a couple of weeks ago. But that's not appropriate to post because I'm wearing shorts. So shorts that would have been appropriate in the 80s, but are not appropriate for Facebook. Not appropriate now. Of the 21st
So it's true
century.
of a lot of things from the 80s. Yeah.
It is. So we do have the picture, and I'll yes, it will not be posted.
We can circulate it privately, though.
We can.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And then you can blackmail me with it in the future. Yeah.
Oh, just add it to the pile.
Perfect.
Well, speaking of getting blackmailed and shamed, the first thing you sent us, RJ, and it sounds like, Sarah, you'd heard about it too. I think we'd mentioned it in passing one time or somewhere on the podcast, but talking about China's new social credit system. There was All Things Considered reported on this, Stacey Vanek Smith, about how the Chinese government is piloting something known as the social credit system. Like the credit scoring system we have in the U.S., China's scores use financial information, but China's system also considers information like what you buy and how you treat your neighbors. If you fail to pay your debts, you might find yourself on a sort of blacklist, and then they actually talked to one of the people. This is a man who is a sort of a former coal miner named Lao Duan, who's 42, lives in Shaanxi province in China. And one day he goes online to book a high-speed train ticket to Beijing. He puts down his name and payment, but right away the page pops up saying he could not complete the purchase. It said this person is on the untrustworthy list from the court. One thing that comes along with the blacklist, this untrustworthy list, is that you are barred from high-end consumption, which means that you cannot take a speed train, you cannot fly either. But then later, when Lao Duan is driving through the center of town, he discovers another aspect of being blacklisted. On one of the electronic billboards by the side of the road, he sees his face. And soon he starts to notice a bunch of his other former colleagues, their faces from the coal industry are also on the blacklist. So he starts calling them, saying, hey, I'm on the list too. He started getting people together, meeting up for dinner. He says these are the only people that he can really be relaxed around. Because actually in society, the widespread attitude towards us, he says, is very resistant. People will think, why are you here being happy? Why do you still have time to be happy? Why do you not go out and make money to pay back your loan? And then they talked to some lawyers in China who say that by all accounts, getting off the blacklist, even if you've paid your debts, it's technically possible, but it just never seems to happen. It sounds like a 1984 kind of thing. Then they finish by saying, as for La Duan, he says he will keep paying off his debt. He has to believe there's a way off this list. Oh, my goodness. I mean, talk
Brutal.
about a sermon illustration brought to life in the most brutal and kind of sad ways. But I love the collective of blacklisted coal miners getting together and that being the only place where you can relax, which is sort of this Sinners Anonymous vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
That actually stood out to me more than anything was like that I loved that he did that. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who will sort of suffer alone, and that he like wanted like a cohort of sufferers and that they can all be together in that is pretty remarkable. And hopefully pretty church-like. But I kept thinking of, do you guys watch Black Mirror? So Josh, my husband, he's like obsessed. I shouldn't say he loves this whole Chinese credit system thing. He's obsessed with it. Like he heard about it on maybe Planet Money, one of the other podcasts he listens to. And the woman referenced the Black Mirror episode where this is put into place. And you sort of walk around with your phone and you're constantly like grading everyone around you, like giving them stars, which, it feels like we're close to, right? If you take an Uber and you order your groceries online, you've done that twice in one day. But the Black Mirror episode is like this. And it's such a disturbing episode to watch because of course that show they push things to like its fullest limit, and there's this moment where she's practicing laughing. The protagonist is practicing laughing in the mirror so that she can be more likable when she's interacting with people. And she's one of those people that God has blessed or cursed with a really high-pitched, painful to listen to laugh. And it is so deeply sad to watch her trying to like make it better in the mirror. That's... So like you hear about this like actually being implemented, and it's just... It's inescapable. It also, the Planet Money thing went into how this is creating a bigger disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, it also plays into a lot of stuff. And for me as a Southerner, about how, Black folks were kind of kept down for longer periods of time because there would be this like way, that they would be, sort of, I don't know if it's too much Southern history, but the company store, you would sort of be tied into the company store and you would always be in debt to the company store and you could never get out of debt. So they always kind of owned your land. They always owned your house and they could take it away at any moment. So it does feel very new and scary, but it's also an incredibly human, sinful impulse to do this to one another.
Yeah. It's just scary to see it, actually implemented.
Like organized.
Organized. Yeah. RJ, what about you?
Yeah, I had a variety of reactions. The first one was that this just struck me as the exact reason why anyone in our country who is slightly right-leaning just can't abide anyone calling himself a democratic socialist. When they hear socialism, this is exactly what they hear, and they're like, "No, freedom. We don't want social security numbers. We don't want to register anything. We don't want any record of us anywhere because it will be used to control us," which always seems a little bit overreactive to me. And then you see it happening in China, and you're like, maybe they have a point. So that was my first thing, and then so my next reaction, interestingly, was similar to the reaction I had around all the Snowden stuff when we found out that actually the government is kind of like recording our conversations and our text messages and all that stuff. And my first reaction was, well, I'm not doing anything that bad. So if I'm not doing anything that bad, like, why should I really care? So like a little bit of self-righteousness creeping in and me wondering about this guy who's been blacklisted and like, feeling kind of sorry for him, but he does owe like $1 million. And somehow over the course of the past year, in that story, he's found a way to pay back 300,000 of it. So maybe he kind of deserves it.
Totally had that thought.
Maybe I'm better than he is. Maybe I would do well in this system. And then maybe all those people that have wronged me, they would get on the bad list and I would be ascendant in all of my righteousness, So I'm not going to lie. I had a little bit of a self-righteous reaction to it. And then my final thing was thinking about another Planet Money episode because Josh is clearly a very intelligent person because I also listen to that podcast. Or I should say I am because I listen to the same podcast
That's
that he
right.
does.
That's right.
But they did a great thing on bankruptcy about 5 years ago, which I wrote a little piece on for Mockingbird. And what an amazing thing it is that we have bankruptcy in America, because that's not something that has always existed. And it used to be, like you said, Sarah, like if you were in debt, you went to debtor's prison and you stayed there until you could pay it off. But if you weren't working, you couldn't pay it off, but no one cared, and then your kids had to pay off, your wife had to pay it off, your grandkids had to pay it off, and there was no escape. And so we have this thing in America where you can declare bankruptcy, which is basically like forgiveness. And yes, it does prevent you from like owning a house for 7 years or something like that. There are some consequences. It's not, it's not full atonement in the Christian sense, but it is somewhat Christian. And at the same time, it allows people to be free to take risks, to try new things, to not live in fear. And it made me thankful for our bankruptcy system, which seems like it's been under assault lately by, banks and credit card companies, which I understand because they probably don't like bankruptcy. But for people that are actually trying to live in the world and make mistakes, it's a very helpful thing. And I say that, I've never filed for bankruptcy. But it's nice to know that if I got myself in real
to know
trouble,
you can. Yeah.
it's an option, that I don't have to spend the rest of my life on a blacklist or in jail.
Well, I really do think it's beautiful that the fellowship he's able to experience among his fellow sinners, the freedom, the kind of fun, and I just picture him calling them up, and
I know.
It's
rather
this,
laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints.
That's right.
To quote Saint
it's this
Billy
amazing
Joel.
picture, and I don't think it's coincidental or arbitrary that it has to do with debits and credits. People always resist that language when it comes to our spiritual life, but this is how the human being operates, and you can act like it's not true, or you can act like it's reductionist or just simplistic, but I think you're cutting yourself off from, unfortunately, a transactional way in which we interact, which I'm grateful that God addresses us at least partly in those terms. And I think that freedom loud done when he says, he has to believe there's a way off this list. And you want to say, why? Why do you have to believe that? Because you might just be digging yourself deeper with every
He needs someone to pay his
moment.
debt. He needs someone to pay his debt.
He needs someone to pay his
to
debt.
ransom him. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
The language of being unworthy, right? And like that they're called the Unworthies, like is so it's just so Christian. It's like, isn't everyone, right? Was the first thought that I had. I mean, isn't everyone unworthy? And isn't that part of the reason that we gather together at church in some ways, because there's this moment of acknowledgement that like, this is the place where we were made worthy. This is the place where we're reminded how we're made worthy. So,
I want to make a prediction that this will serve to grow Christianity in China.
Oh, yes. I actually
Christianity is
wondered
already
about that.
exploding in China.
Right.
Like they say, there may be more Christians in China than any other nation on the face of the earth right now. Now there are 1.2 billion Chinese, but I would not be surprised if this drove more people into churches, actually.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's also a profound confusion about what motivates people to actually change, and is this simply a way to stratify society, or is it a way to get those people to pay their debts? Is it a way to sort of reform them? If that's the case, then they maybe would do well to read Alfie Kohn's incredible op-ed that appeared in the New York Times this week. Science confirms that people are not pets, in which he details the discovery that when we are rewarded for doing something, we tend to lose interest in whatever we had to do to get the reward. When you promise people a reward, they often perform more poorly as a result. The conclusions that rewards frequently kill both interest and excellence have only grown more solid in recent years. And Cohn's got a book about this that's just come out in a new edition. And he talks about it hasn't really stopped parents and teachers from kind of exercising sugar-coated control, where we promise rewards to kids who obey and do well. But here he goes on. He says, questions that stemmed from these basic findings. For instance, what if the reward is really large and luscious? Well, it's apt to do even more damage to your motivation, scientists have found. Are rewards destructive because they distract people from the task? Apparently not, because other distractions don't have the same negative effects. Which is worse, giving people a set reward for doing something or making it contingent on how well they do it? The latter is worse by a long shot. Give a bunch of adults or children a puzzle to solve or say a poem to write. Promise half of them a reward if they're successful, and then watch as they end up being less creative and less interested in the task than those promised nothing. The trouble doesn't lie with the type of reward, the schedule on which it's presented, or any other detail of how it's done. The problem is the outdated theory of motivation underlying the whole idea of treating people like pets. That is saying, do this and you'll get that. The best that carrots or sticks can do is change people's behavior temporarily. We're talking about the law here, everyone. They can never create a lasting commitment to an action or a value, and often have the exact opposite effect, contrary to hypothesis. That's the phrase that always comes up in these studies. Contrary to hypothesis, this is what human beings are like. To talk about school attendance, in the case of attendance, it's a lot easier and much less threatening to those in position of authority to reward students and workers for showing up than it is to reconfigure schools and workplaces so that people are more likely to want to show up. It's a very inconvenient finding for those of us with small children.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And yet, when it comes to, as they say, you can get the law will change someone's threat of punishment, hope of reward, can change someone's behavior for a little while. Yeah. Attendance will go up, but the second those rewards go away, they found that attendance dropped even worse rates than what it was before. You cannot change a person's heart using carrots and sticks, and the motivation is the key issue. The credit system in China may make a few things easier, but ultimately it's not going to change the heart of someone who is
church attendance
prone
and
to spend
alcohol
more than they have.
consumption will go way up.
Yeah. What do you think about this, guys? Alfie Kohn. I've wanted to invite him to a Mockingbird conference forever.
That'd be awesome. So I actually thought of something that happened this past week. We have a treasure box at home. And if you go above and beyond in whatever sense I have as judge deemed worthy, my favorite line from this is rewards are like punishments and they're ultimately about power. I was like, oh, so I get to judge whether or not you're worthy for the prize box. And so Annie and Neil were playing outside. Annie, who's 4, and Neil, who's 7. Annie lost Neil's bouncy ball, in the grass, and they couldn't find it. And, he came in upset. And later, Annie was especially kind to Neil, or she did something. I can't remember what it was, but I was like, you know what? You go to the treasure. That was great, Annie. Go to the treasure box. So Annie goes to the treasure box. She digs around in there for 3 minutes. She finds a bouncy ball, and then she gives it to Neil. To replace the one that she lost instead of getting something for herself.
Oh, wow.
Which was very powerful. I was like, wait, it was very powerful for me, but it was also I was like, it was interesting to read the thing about the word power because she kind of shifted the power in that moment, right? I was no longer the one bestowing this, oh, you get to get something in a treasure box. She took it as a moment to then give something to her brother. And because I had the thought, I was like, well, that's not how I thought that was going to go down, And when I read this piece, I was like, it probably felt better to Annie to get something and then give it to her brother whose feelings she'd hurt than to get something for herself, which is fascinating. I don't know. So I thought, power. It's a real waste of time.
What a girl, that Annie Banana.
Oh man,
last I saw her, she's dressed as a mermaid elephant or something. Or
she was a mermaid, and then she wore her brother's giraffe costume. And Annie is I'm not kidding. Annie's 6 inches taller than everyone else in her class. So the giraffe costume was complete with a high waters look. It was amazing. Anyway, neither here nor there.
Rutger.
I'm trying to figure out if we do this or not. Whether we, reward our children based on good behavior.
Oh.
I don't think we do.
Did you do it when they were little though? When you had 2 little boys?
Well, I'm thinking about Marshall, of course, who's 2 years old, and I don't think we do with him either. I think so our struggle right now with him is that he wants to do absolutely everything himself. He'll say, Marshall, do it 1,000 times a day. And if you do it and he wanted to do it, he'll freak out like, no, Marshall, like you open the door, Marshall, do it. You'll kind of try, so everything just takes 10 times as long as it needs to. And every so often, like you just got to go somewhere. Like actually yesterday, I was taking him to preschool and we had to cross over the parking lot and he really didn't want to do it. Okay, he just didn't want to cross the parking lot. Kind of wanted to meander and just kind of take his time and probably drive me a little bit crazy. So he's just doing his thing. So finally, I'm like, okay, this is over. I give him a count of 3. And then I pick him up by one of his arms and I just carry him across the parking lot. And he freaks out and crumples down. Marshall, do it. Marshall, do it. And I'm like, what do I do here? So I allow him to cross back over to the other side of the parking lot and then do it again himself. And then he goes to school happy, which I don't know. I feel like I should put my foot down more than I do, but I also want to encourage independence and I want him to want to do what he wants to do. So I don't know. It is driving us totally insane. It's driving my wife completely insane. But at the same time, he does have some sense of self-empowerment. So
he also has like
I don't know
2
what to
brothers
do.
that are so much older than he is. And so,
I
I mean,
know.
more than I would think a child who had like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old sibling, he's like, wait, I want to be in it with everybody. Like, I
He
don't
also
know.
uses it to control us, because he'll say he wants us to do something, then he'll do it. Then he'll like, no, don't do that, so we won't. And then he'll be like, no, do that. No, don't do that. No, do that. So it's just like
I
we're
mean,
little.
That's just like
he's
neurotic
the puppet
2-year-olds.
master, and we're
We call our 2-year-old sire. I mean, you were speaking. You could not be speaking my language more right now. I'm almost about to start crying. This is a little too close to home because I'm really struggling with the fact that my son is just extremely strong-willed when it comes to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I've heard we even tried the other day. We're so at our wits' end that we tried to do a timeout. And for a 2-year-old, they don't understand consequences. There's no reward punishment. It doesn't really make sense.
They're
All they
fresh
know
out
is
of
what they want,
ducks.
and they want it right
we
now.
tried
They're
for the
fresh
first
out
time
of ducks.
too. We did the step, like go
And
sit on the step.
didn't
and
work.
It worked a little tiny bit, but I don't know. I want to give the kid freedom, and I don't want to tell him to do, and I don't want to bring the thunder. But sometimes you just got to live life. Like we can't spend 20 minutes like walking out the front door.
I
Except
hear
when
you
we do.
with
Except when we do.
every fiber
So-
of my being. I think that it relates a little bit to the Dorothy Martin stuff we were talking about last time, though.
Yeah.
Are we? What about us? We're thinking of ourselves as parents. What about when we're the children? If you want to get to it to where it really hits home, this is how a lot of religious people think that if you reward of heaven,
Yes.
penalty of
Yes.
hell. This is
Yes.
how you motivate people towards the Christian
Yes.
life, and it's simply not. I mean, fear will work for a little while, but it won't. It's not enough to change a person's heart, and this is why I think what Christ talking about the motivation, the internal life, so explicitly is. One of the great things that abides with you over time, that God cares about the heart, and your motivation matters. And if you really want someone, if someone's only coming to church because they're afraid, I sometimes tell them, take a break.
Yeah.
And just see what happens.
Yeah, I actually think the crux here is not that fear doesn't work. It's that fear is damaging. I mean, that's what we see in this research, is that it's actually damaging to us.
Actually backfires.
Yeah. I mean, it's and we know people. I know people in my life who have been damaged by that kind of a theology, and it does permanent damage to their relationship with the church. Like, it's deeply sad. So
And we can't get away from it. And I have a personal story about this. A few months back, I was hanging out, with a member of our congregation who's very smart, very well read. He's seen a lot of stuff, like a lot of bad, disturbing stuff. And I think, and the way that he has dealt with that is basically, and he would say this to some degree, becoming a deist. That it is very difficult for him to believe in a God who intervenes in his life or the life of the world, given all that goes on down here. Because let's face it, things are pretty messed up down here, right? And so he's talking about this, and he's very intellectual, and he's being very heady, and how God hasn't intervened. And then I just sort of asked him, I said, well, I said, my prayer for you is that God would answer a prayer of yours, that you would pray something and that something would happen in your life that would be unmistakable, that you would know that he is with you, that he loves you, that he's on your side, that you'd experience his presence in an unmistakable way. So I said, what do you need? Like, what would you pray for? And he just started crying. And he cried and he said, I would pray for my family. I would pray for my my son who is bipolar and can't get his life together. I would pray for my other son who we don't have a relationship anymore. I would pray for my ex-wife, who left me. And then he said something striking. He said, and it was just a little throwaway line, but sometimes I think that God is punishing me. So even this guy who has done everything he possibly can to escape the idea of a God who intervenes can't help but feel that the pain of his life is the result of judgment for something that he's done. And so I tried to speak some hope and peace into his life and just say, that's not true. Like, God is so on your side that he came down to love you and to die for you, and to take all of your pain on himself. And I don't think that made much of a difference. But that was just striking what you said, Dave. Like, we cannot help but get away from the sense that we've done something wrong and that or that we've done something right. If things are going well, it's because I did something right. If things are going badly, it's because I did something wrong. But it's probably more often the second than the first. So.
I ran the book table, which is, by the way, I can retire now because this was like the best thing I've ever done in ministry. I got to run the book table when Fleming Rutledge spoke at clergy conference. And so there was this long line of people there, and there was this clergy woman in our diocese I know who Fleming knew from years ago, who is going through a lot. And she, I was sort of told with the signing to kind of move things along, and I know this person. I was like, I'm not going to push this. I'm just going to like stand back and people can wait. And I thought, what is Fleming going to do? Like, what's about to happen? And so Fleming's like sitting at she's so beautifully appointed, right? She's got her desk and she's got her books and she's sitting there. And she stopped. She just dropped the pen. She moved the book to the side. She stood up and she reached out her hands to pray with this woman. And it was such a powerful, I don't know. It was like, oh, this is what we do. Oh, this is who we are, in the midst of someone feeling punished or like there's just no reason. Like they're trapped in like some scary story in the Bible they can't get out of. Oh, this is what we do. We call again on God. So.
Yeah, I prayed with him, and there was something about his story that touched me, and I cried. Actually, I think I freaked him out a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah, but
well, that's beautiful though. I mean, I don't want to say that we don't have hope in heaven, or we don't have some kind of sense of consequence. That really preaches to people who've had something terrible going on in their life, or the fact that we believe what it was like Lao Dawn. We believe that someone has paid our debts, but the debts are real. We're not pretending that we're sort of we're something we're not. But that kind of where our discussion sort of leads is to something I read by Father Stephen Freeman. We've talked about him quite a bit. He's an Orthodox priest, I think in Tennessee somewhere, and he wrote something this week. We've mentioned him a lot. It seems like there's just an enormous amount of overlap, but he also, then he'll write something about Orthodoxy that'll be like, wait, what? But anyway.
We'll be like, saying who? I don't.
Huh?
What?
What? Theosis? But he wrote something called Existential Despair and Moral Futility. And he actually fields a couple of the hesitancy, reservations that I've heard people express about Mockingbird all the time, and I thought he did it really well. He says, a couple years back, a comment was posted on social media that described my writing as consisting of existential despair and moral futility. It was not meant with kindness. But then he goes on to explain how he thinks it's both true what they're saying, but also incomplete. And this is what he says. Our life is fragile and exists only as a precious gift. We have no existence in and of ourselves and are thus entirely thus utterly contingent beings. This rather obvious conclusion has been frequently reinforced over the course of my life and ministry. I've buried hundreds of people. Death is a fact of life. However, our culture maintains a pretense and delusion of self-existence, even imagining that we somehow invent ourselves. It is a good marketing strategy as we sell mounds of trash for people to use in their efforts at self-definition. He says, I do not despair of life and existence itself, except in the sense that it is anything other than pure gift. As such, to stand at the edge of the abyss of non-existence seems to me to be among the sanest efforts ever undertaken. We cannot possibly understand who and what we are until we also consider the fact of our death. Those who struggle to believe that there might be such a thing as life after death have failed to ponder how absurdly improbable life before death truly is. Our existence shouts the reality of a giver of life, all life. Our non-existence proclaims the emptiness of any claims to the contrary. I hope in God. In him there is no despair, but only in him. I've also caught some flack for suggesting that we make very little progress of the moral sort in our lives. The track of salvation is not, by and large, one of moral improvement. It was assumed by many that I did not think moral improvement was to be possible or even desirable, but that is not the case. This is what he says. He says, the moral life, if rightly understood, cannot be measured by outward actions. The Pharisees in the New Testament were morally pure in an outward sense, but inwardly were, quote, full of dead men's bones. When morality is measured by dead bones, it is still nothing more than death. Human effort cannot make what is dead to live. Only God can do such a thing. Repentance is the primary effort of our life, or the way up is the way down. The spiritual life is a paradox. The excellence of the Pharisees was met with condemnation from Christ. The emptiness of the weak and sinful was met with mercy and healing. Their acknowledged weakness made the working of the power of God effective in their lives. What passes for a, quote, moral life in our culture is little more than the successful internalization of middle-class behavior. But it is necessary, I think, to see the emptiness of our efforts, moral futility. Just as we cannot make ourselves to live, neither do we make ourselves better persons. An improved corpse is still a corpse. Our repentance is born out of the revelation of our emptiness and the futility of life apart from God. Of course, existential despair and moral futility are not my self-description. They are terms chosen by a detractor. I believe that mud not only can become a god, but that it has many times. This is the work of God who hears our cries and works within us, doing what he alone can do, just as he alone gives us the life we live and breathe at every moment. It is not despair because every moment of our present gifted existence shouts and proclaims the goodness of God, the author of being. It is not futility because with God all things are possible. But apart from him, we can do nothing. That nothing is indeed despair and futility. A little light, a little lightness to end
Mic
this
drop.
podcast. Yeah,
I know.
it's sort of a sermon that he's giving here. That
Yeah, totally.
It's
Yeah.
Beautiful in the sense that he's
Yeah.
pushing. The people think that. To speak of low anthropology, to speak of that we cannot do better on our own. I had the experience this past week of teaching a class at our church about foolishness for Christ, and I was talking about the Heidelberg Disputation, which has just had its 500th anniversary. And when Luther talks about our best works being deadly sins, and what does that mean? And everyone sort of, you saw the looks on people's faces, and you want to say, okay. This doesn't mean that it's not good to, help the elderly across the street. What it means is that it's much more tempting to trust in yourself, in your good works, than it is when you do bad things. That if what God is looking for is naked trust, we'll be much more tempted to trust in ourselves to the extent that we're doing good things. And so, to a certain extent, the way that you get to the way that you find God is the way down. It's what's the way up is the way down. That God, Sherry, you're the one who always says grace flows to the bottom of the hill, or the bottom of the trough. I was thinking about how radical but how beautiful of a statement that is, and yet I also hate it in the same time. And Stephen Freeman is really talking about the 200 proof kind of variety of grace and mercy. So.
It reminded me of two things. One was one of my favorite passages of Scripture, which I'm not sure if I've quoted here before. I probably have, so my apologies. But it's Romans 8, which uses that exact word, futility, where Paul says, the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who created it. In other words, God subjected the creation to futility in the hopes that the creation will be liberated from its bondage to decay and enter into the freedom of the glorious children of light. And I love that because it says that yes, life is futile, but there's a purpose behind it and there's a hope attached to it, and that there's a freedom that comes with understanding the futility of life. So I love that passage. And then, of course, also what Gerhard Forde wrote, I think, in his little essay on sanctification, where he said, and he's now deceased, but this was towards the end of his life, he was a seminary professor, and some of his students said, Dr. Forde, now that you are so, been a Christian for so long and are so spiritually mature, do you feel sanctified? Do you feel better? And he said, well, I don't have as much energy as I used to, so I don't sin quite as much. He's like, but I don't think senility and holiness are the same thing. But he did, which is amazing. But he said, what I do have is more a greater sense of God's love for me as I am. And that feels a little bit like holiness. So it's not that I'm sinning less, it's that I have a greater sense of God's love for me as I am. And that fills me with joy, hope, peace, love, sort of all those fruits of the Spirit. So I love that vision of sanctification, not that we're progressing, but that we're resting in what God has done for us and his love for us. So this article is amazing, Dave. This Greek Orthodox article is incredible. Eastern Orthodox, whatever.
What? Sarah, what do you think?
Well, it's funny. So you sent this, and somebody who I only know through Facebook, an Episcopal priest who I've recently become friends with, had somehow found my low anthropology as my love language piece that I wrote for the website and had tagged me in it and put it up today. And I really feel like this guy and I could take our show on the road. You know what I mean? Like Donnie and Marie Osmond style. And just talk about low anthropology.
You gotta grow a beard first.
Him with his beard, me with my very colorful Protestant lady clothes, I loved reading this from a more Orthodox perspective. Was really interesting because it is a lot of the same stuff that we say. This actually spoke personally to me. Well, I shall say, Dave, when you were reading this, I was like, you can't cry. Why are you crying right now? Because this is when I hear this stuff, this is really where joy is for me, which is a very strange thing for some people to think about. But when I hear that that my efforts are futile and that I am loved, that is where relief is for me. I mean, I was at the hospital a few weeks ago visiting someone who was dying and could hear and but couldn't respond. And I made sure to say, just to talk about how loved this person was, how much Jesus loves this person, because that's a thing that we cannot hear enough. I have a colleague who actually commented, not someone I work with on staff here, but another Episcopal priest, it's not our job to make people less scared of the unknown. And I'm like, I know,
that's
right?
Absolutely our job.
I was like, I feel like that's my job, but maybe that's not your job. I don't know. And to step in and say, I mean, in that moment of finality, of death, that you, it's still true. Even now, it's still true. Everything you failed at and everything you couldn't do, you're still loved. You're still forgiven. It's still been done on your behalf. We cannot hear that enough. And the other way that this spoke to me was, in the aftermath of the horrible shooting in Squirrel Hill at the Tree of Life Synagogue, to read, what this Orthodox priest is saying here. He actually says we work rightly in our human sphere, doing what is humanly possible. And when I found out about the shooting, I was home with my children. Josh was doing something at the church, and I was weeping, and I had the radio on, and I was trying to figure out what was happening. And my kids came over, and they were like, we really want to try on our Halloween costumes. And our son this year went as one of those like windmen that they put in the parking lots of used car lots. And it is the funniest damn thing I have ever seen. And like you turn it on and like his arms are everywhere. And like and I was just like, this I can do. Like I can be with these children and I can tell them how loved they are and I can tell them how loved everyone is, like against all odds. Like this I can do. So like when I read this piece, I was like, he is like literally speaking to me, you know?
Wow.
So
wow. I just want to underline how funny that costume does
Oh my
look.
gosh.
I don't know. I kept every single thing he does in the costume is funny too. So it's like I imagine it because he's 6, 7-year-old boy, so 8 years old, and
he's 7.
he doesn't want to be laughed at, but it is very
No, he
funny.
thinks it's the coolest thing ever. Like every time he would bend over to get candy, he'd like tilt over just from the...
Well, yeah, I was also I remember talking to someone who had heard preaching at our church for a long time, and he said, Dave, I got to ask you something. Do you think people are basically always in existential crisis based on the way that you guys preach? Do you think that people are always in existential crisis? And my honest answer is yes, I do think that. I think that people are always basically in existential crisis, wondering what's it all for, what's it all about, who am I, what's going on. But if not acute, then someone there is in existential crisis. And so and maybe it's the role of the Orthodox have a pretty highfalutin understanding of what it means to be a priest, but maybe it's the role of people in ministry to sort of stand on the abyss and to, that's the really uncomfortable part, is to not only stand on the abyss of the fact that we're all going to die, despite the fact that everyone is so up in arms about this, that, or the other. And in the light of eternity, these things lose a little bit of their power, what people are so upset about, but then also to realize yourself, that your own moral efforts are really dead bones. That the work of you can identify and see the work of God in people's lives it happens independent of their effort, and you can celebrate that. But to constantly be going into yourself and realizing that you yourself are subjected to futility apart from God, that your own hope and your own abilities to do things really doesn't have much of a future. That's exhausting, and I think that that's really it's a gift that occasionally we can give other people. But this man, I know, has given it to me on a number of occasions. And maybe it's because he's Orthodox and he has the whole nine. He's got the beard and all that stuff. It's almost an unexpected vessel for me. But I've found that I'm grateful for Father Freeman for his honesty here, and I hope that. I'm glad that it's out there and it really speaks to me personally.
Yeah.
Was it Fleming, Sarah, at Clergy Conference, who said that the point of preaching was to move people to a point of crisis?
Yes.
That's actually the entire point of it. It's not to tell bedtime stories. It is to bring people face to face with the insanity and unmanageability of their lives, which is kind of always the case. And Dave, I remember your dad telling that same story when he was at one of his calls and someone coming up to him and saying, does it always have to, why is it so dark? Why does it have to be so dark? And I'm saying, well, maybe there's a great truth here. Maybe there actually is a great truth of human life that people don't want to look at. They don't want to think about. They want to gloss over. But we want to talk about the weightier things,
and in the darkness is where the light shines. I mean, that's
where the light shines. Exactly.
So let me just say before we end, I mean, what a wonderful. I commend that article to everyone to sort of read and reread and reread. I'm going to post it on it next week if I get the chance. But what happened in the Mockingbird world this past week was that not only are the Oklahoma City files up, and everyone has got to listen to Stephen Paulson's first talk and Carrie Willard's talk. They really are just as fabulous as can possibly be, and the amount of inspiration I've heard people drawing from them is really God-given and exciting. But secondly, the Mocking app dropped. It's only for iOS X devices, so Apple devices. That's because these things are incredibly expensive, and the only people we know who are willing to cut us an enormous deal are only designed for Apple. And plus, 83% of our traffic comes from those devices. But it's free. It's on the iTunes Store. You can listen to the Mockingcast that way. You can listen to all of our other podcasts, and you can read the app and the entire Mockingbird devotionals on there. And definitely commend that to you. Tell everyone you know. and allows you to share things. But do write a review if you get a chance, because that helps more people get it. So that's all. I'm grateful to all of you for listening, and happy Halloween, and happy Reformation Day, and happy November.
Happy All Saints Day.
All Saints!
Happy Dia de los Muertos. I mean, let's just haul them all out, guys.
There's a lot going on.
Happy
There's a lot
Bearable
going
Weather
on.
in Houston Day.
Okay, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.